Okay. Zoom genius. All right, so much more than her 20 years in education as a counselor in the US, the UK, Turkey, and Singapore, Joan Liu is a fierce champion for change, an advocate that all students are deserving of access and equity, and a beacon of hope and compassion. I am so pleased to welcome you today, Joan, and with that, I will turn the screen over to you for your beautiful presentation.
Melissa, thank you for having me here. Kids, it's really nice to be here. I would really actually love if you all, I don't know if everybody's able to turn on their videos, but it would be great. Please feel free to turn on your video and just introduce yourself quickly. I'll call on you to introduce you if people are able to turn on their videos. So feel free to do that. And then I think what I'm going to ask you all to do is just maybe say what countries you're interested in applying to. Melissa, do you think people are able to turn on their videos, or is the data such that like it's very difficult to do? So you can weigh in, Shrajani, Tinley, let me know if this is a request that's not possible.
I don't know. I don't know. What do you think, Tinley?
I think some can probably turn on their video, but some just must be shy. So maybe just for your introduction, if everyone can just turn on your video and then you can have it turned off later.
Also think, I think there are 18 people, so I don't know if there will be enough time. Maybe we can just do a little wave. I don't know. Or we could type in the chat. We could do a really quick type into the chat where you're interested. And I can check those out for Joan, if you could. I'd love to type that into the chat.
Well, at least I see two of you. I see three of you. This is really great. And it's lovely to see girls on this call. I'm super excited about that. So Cho Ying, I can see you. Yeah. Gaylina, I can see you too. I saw you for all of 2 seconds. Namita, hi, welcome. It's nice to meet you all.
I think if you're not talking, please have your audio mute so that there's no cross noise coming over. And when you speak, you can turn your unmute yourself.
Okay, Dechen, nice to see you. I apologize if I'm saying your names wrong. Can everybody just take a moment to use the chat to just say, hi, my name is, Cho Ying, and then say what school you're coming from. And then also what country you are particularly interested in, so that I just have a sense of how to kind of focus the presentation to your needs. I am, as Melissa said, a counselor in Singapore, and I actually met Melissa when she was here. I mean, we both, at the circuit, the international circuit's very small, and I really respect Melissa for the kind of work that she has done in this field. So I'm really glad to be here as part of her endeavor and your team's endeavor to help give you more access to information. So everybody, if you could just drop. Oh, so Deki, you're studying in Singapore International School of Bangkok. Wow, I didn't even actually know there was a Singapore International School of Bangkok. That's crazy. Yeah, so everybody, if you could just basically put down where you're studying, it would be great. And I just want to welcome you all to this presentation. I'm going to ask you during this presentation to use the chat to interact and to sometimes give your thoughts. And so I would really encourage you to just use that chat so that I can also, in a sense, be aware of like what your needs are during this phone call. Okay, so as you guys do that, I'm going to open up my screen. You study in Woodstock. That's in India. We know you're a counselor. Okay. Okay. Canada, Singapore, US. Okay, I'll talk about Singapore then a little bit. And so some parents are on this call. Welcome, parents. It's nice to have you here. And okay. Wow. Okay, this is great. So we actually have some different countries here too. That's wonderful. So thank you, everybody. And please feel free to just keep on dropping everything in. All right. So I'm going to start to share my screen here. And what I'd like for us to do in the next hour is I'd like for you to have a sense of how money works in the US. Okay. How money works specifically for if you want money and if you need money. And those are two different things. And I want you to kind of get an overview of this so that you kind of have a framework for trying to understand things beyond the basics. So this is just very basics 101. It would be what I would consider to be like just like some really core things one has to know before stepping into the financial aid landscape. Because as you know, or as you hopefully know, the US is a very decentralized system. There's 4,000 different schools, and people have all sorts of different ways of distributing money and of calculating need. So I'm going to talk about case studies, and how I'm going to do this is we're going to first talk about the kid who prefers to have money. Okay, they want money. They don't necessarily need it, okay? And then we're going to do a case study where a kid absolutely needs money. So in other words, if this kid doesn't get money, they can't go. So we're going to talk about those two cases, and you're going to be able to see, and they're real cases. One is one student that I worked with here in Singapore, and another one is a student that I worked with in Ghana. And I want you to, as I go through this, think about what you would do if you were in the student's position, okay? At the end of the presentation, I'm going to ask you for your takeaways, like what are you learning that maybe you didn't know before? I'm also going to ask for your questions, okay, so that we can clarify any anything that you don't understand or anything that you perhaps are wondering further about. And then as a follow-up, what I'll do is I'll send to Melissa some additional resources based on what you are asking, okay? So I have a sense, for example, that people are already asking about like multiple countries like Canada and Singapore, so I will cover that. And I do see that you're interested in the US as well. So I will also do that. Okay, we are gonna start with the US because the US is where you can actually get a ton of aid. It's also very hard to get aid. There are different countries that are English-speaking countries or that have higher education systems that will do programs in English. And they're probably more than you are aware of. For example, India, Japan, Hong Kong, Singapore, South Korea, the Middle East, like Qatar, Europe, the Netherlands. These are all countries that have higher education programs in English. So you can all go there to study. But when we talk about aid, when we talk about covering 100% of the costs, there are a handful of countries from those lists that will give 100% aid. And so we're going to talk a little bit about the US for a good portion of this, and then I'm going to talk about some other countries as well, okay? So we're going to talk here about two students. Student A wants money and student B needs money, and one would be a preference and one would be a barrier, okay? So let's say that student A is, let's call him Jason. He is a real student who I worked with, but that's not his real name. That is a name that I gave him so that I can protect his anonymity. And he was a student who could technically afford to go to the United States, but he was a student who preferred to have scholarship. So in other words, he was trying to make his situation more affordable for himself. But could he technically manage the full sticker price? Yes, absolutely. Okay, so if you're in this situation where you can actually afford a college in the United States and you want to lower the sticker price, okay, and let's talk about the sticker price for a second because there's different sticker prices. And by sticker prices, I mean the cost of attendance, tuition, room and board, books, healthcare, that sort of thing. There's a really wide range of what something costs in the United States. I mean, you can go for something as little as $25,000. Also, you can go for something as high as 82,000 USD, okay? And so there is a wide range of price points in the United States. So given all those different price points, like what does a student do? Like where do they start? If they're basically wanting to go to the United States, they technically can afford the United States. They could afford an $82,000 education, but they're trying to get the cost down as low as possible, okay? So in this particular case, what would be available to a student is merit scholarships. Merit scholarships don't depend on your need. In other words, you don't have to fill out financial documentation proving that you are a student who needs money. Merit is usually defined as something like your grades, your leadership, and your contributions. Now, there's no clear definition for leadership. There's no clear definition for contributions, but in general, People are looking for somebody who's not only an academically strong student, but also a student who's strong outside of the classroom, okay? And so examples of this would be the Jefferson Scholarship at University of Virginia, which is in the middle of America, the Moorhead Kane Scholarship, which is at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. That's also a full scholarship, so tuition, room, and board. It covers 100% of the costs. And then also the Belk Scholarship, which is at a liberal arts college called Davidson College. Okay, the range of merit scholarships that you have in the United States can be something that covers 25% of the full cost of attendance, something that covers 50%, 75%, 100%. There's a range there of how much merit scholarships there are. So some merit scholarships that you see at universities for international students are very low. They're like $2,000, $1,000. And some of them are really high. Like if you apply to the Jefferson, the Moorhead, the Belk, and you were able to, on the basis of your grades, leadership, and contribution, be a finalist and then get that scholarship, you could basically have the full cost of attendance covered. Now, you have the full cost of attendance covered, but there are also costs that you should be aware of that require you to get to the United States that are not covered. And these would be what we would call indirect costs. Indirect costs are the visa costs, what's called the SEVIS cost, the cost of any immunizations that you have to take before you go to the United States, the flight ticket, okay, getting to the United States, and particularly this year, quarantine. So if you have to quarantine somewhere, the university doesn't pay for that, you do, okay? And you pay for the food as well, the travel cost to the university. So when we talk about the full cost of attendance, or when a university says that they will take care of the full cost of attendance, they mean the full cost of their attendance, not the full cost of what it takes for you to get from your home to the university, okay? What is that cost exactly? What do we calculate indirect costs to be? Usually from this part of the world, $3,000 to $5,000. Okay, so if the full cost of attendance, if it costs at Davidson $80,000, it's actually costing in real life $85,000 because you got to get there. Okay, so what does this student do if they want to lower the cost? So let's take an actual student here. This is student A. This is a Chinese male student who attended my school, which is the United World College here in Singapore. He's an engineering student. He's a pretty good student. We run something called the IB diploma, and he's a 40 out of 45. You know, what does that mean to you? It means he's a pretty good student, but not the best student. So let's say a student who's in the top 25% of the class. In other systems, he would be considered an A or A- student. And his SAT is what I would consider also pretty good, but not exceptional. Okay, so you can see 1450 out of 1600. So what does he decide to do? He basically applies to a mix of public universities and private universities. And I've put the public universities here in orange. I put the private universities here in blue so that you can basically see what he did and what he got. Okay, so I want you to notice something about this list. He does not have any Ivy League schools on this list. He does not have Princeton, Harvard, Yale, MIT. He can't be in that bucket if he wants to basically try to get merit aid. Why? Because these schools don't have a merit scholarship, and also because he's trying to be at the top of the pool. Can he be at the top of the pool at University of Florida? Yes. Can he be at the top of Princeton pools? The Princeton's pool? No. So we constructed a list together where he would be what we consider to be at the top of those applicant pools, and then he applied. The other thing that we were trying to do when we were trying to construct his list is beyond trying to get him into the top 10% of those applicant pools, we were looking for overall lower costs. So if you look at this chart here, you can see, for example, that even though we know the highest, most expensive school in the United States is $85,000, he's applying to Cal Poly, which is $45,000. So we're trying to also lower that cost initially at the start, okay? And then off of that lower price, we're trying to get an even lower price with a scholarship. So we've got here a mix of schools ranging from $40,000 to $72,000. And then I've got in this column, the second column, the scholarship that he got, that he was able to get, okay? And as you can see, with University of Florida, he gets $28,000 $28,007 off of the $40,000 cost of attendance. So basically that means that he has to then pay $11,300 per year. And that is the school that he chooses to go to. He chooses to go there because basically he has the cheapest price out of all of these schools. Okay, now, I want you to understand that he technically is able to afford Case Western, which is $72,000, but he wants to lower the sticker price. And that's why he went through this process and got basically a quarter of the price of University of Florida. Instead of paying $160,000 over 4 years, he's basically paying 45. Okay, I hope that that makes sense. Melissa, am I going too fast? Do you
So
feel like
far,
this is
so
okay so
good.
far?
So far, so good. I let people know that if they have questions during any of this, to just type them into the chat. But I think so far, so good.
Okay, so let me see if there's any questions here. Is the cost of attendance in the table the total cost for the student or the school's perspective? This is the school's perspective. Okay, so technically, that's such a great question. Thank you. For University of Florida, does everybody see where he's basically, Melissa, can you see my arrow here?
Yes, we can see your arrow.
Okay, so does everybody see how he's basically paying $11,300 per year? But remember how I said there's extra indirect costs? Technically, to get there the first year, he needs to pay something like $11,700 or $11,800. Okay, so why? Because he's got to fly from Singapore to the University of Florida. He's got to purchase books. He's got to get his bedspread and some of the stuff that he needs for his dorm room. He's got to do his visa, his SEVIS. So he has extra costs beyond the $11,300. So when you look at the numbers, you want to kind of also think to yourself in your mind, okay, but I need also this extra money. All right. So, all right, we're going to move on from this point and we're going to talk about a resource that I think is very helpful. Let me see if I can go back here. Can I go back? All right. So if you're in this situation where basically you want to lower your costs, there is something that's really helpful out there, and I've used it for multiple students that are looking for scholarships, and it's something called Concourse Global. Basically, you go onto this platform and 70 universities can basically look at your profile and they can kind of make offers to you. In a way, it's like a reverse script. So instead of you applying to schools, schools can apply to you, okay? You have to have a counselor or somebody at your school to be able to do this process. It's free for the school, it's free for you, the student, and then it's not free for the university. Okay, so when I was, let's see if I can go back here.
Joan, this is Melissa. I will let you know that I will post, I do have a Concourse account that I would be able to use for students. So I will post that information in our platform.
Okay, thank you. So everybody, this is an example of Concourse, like what you'd put into a Concourse. This is what the university would see. So if I'm a university, I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, okay, this kid is this type of school, Shanghai Community International School from China. And I'm like, oh, all right. So they're taking an IB curriculum and this is kind of what they're looking for. And if I have a scholarship and I think that this student is like within the realm of that, like I can automatically issue that scholarship to the student over this platform. Okay, why am I recommending this to you? Because usually if you're looking for affordable costs, you know, you can get like a waiver to be on Concourse so that you basically can apply to all 70 of these schools for zero money, or the usual student will pay one-time $75 fee and then be exposed to 70 different universities across 6 countries. So this platform has universities from Canada, which some of you said you were interested in, the United States. It also has schools from New Zealand, Australia, Malaysia, the UK, although the UK has no scholarships. Like really, the UK is not a place to go to if you want like larger amounts of money. We generally, when I'm working with a student, don't recommend the UK. I mean, as you can see with Jason's list, we just focused entirely on the United States. Okay. So, all right. So that's Case number one. We're going to move on to case number two. So this is a kid who basically has very little to spend on the college application process. This is a kid who absolutely needs the money. If he doesn't have the money, like from a university, he's not issued a scholarship, he just absolutely cannot go. Okay. So when a student needs money, what are the 4 different ways that they can kind of get, let's call it a full scholarship? All right. You can get a merit scholarship. So you can do what the last kid did. You can apply to a school that doesn't require any financial documentation, like UVA's Jefferson Scholarship or University of North Carolina's Moorhead Kane Scholarship. Okay. You can also apply to 3 other buckets of schools that do require financial aid documentation because they are looking for you to prove that you need money. The second bucket would be what I would call the bucket of, it's a need-aware school and it meets full need. So these are schools like liberal arts colleges that are, many like Davidson would be also a need-aware and meets full need school, which is a school that has the Belk Scholarship, but also has this process in place. What does this mean? Okay, the biggest thing that you need to know is that when you apply to this bucket of schools, okay, and schools are very transparent about whether or not they're in this bucket or not, they will literally use this language on their website. You have to know that your chances of getting in are slim, okay? And so when you see, for example, on the website, them saying our acceptance rate is 23%, that's an average. What you need to know is that in general, if you are applying for like Swarthmore, Vassar, Davidson, Haverford, you know, like these liberal arts colleges that are need aware and meet full need, your chances are usually less than 2%. Why am I telling you this? Because I want you to understand that Harvard's admit rate is around that. So the odds are really hard in this bucket, okay? Number 3, the third bucket that you could apply to would be like 5 schools in the United States that are need blind and meet full need. Okay, these are schools like Harvard, Princeton, Yale, MIT, Amherst. Like those are basically the schools that are need blind. Now, the difference between a need blind school and a need aware school is basically admissions officers are reading, I'm reading an application and I don't care whether or not you can get, like you can afford me or not. But if I'm a need aware institution, if I'm in bucket number 2, then I have to always keep in my mind as I'm reading the file, like, can I afford you? Can I not afford you? I have this amount of money to use. So that's why it's really, really hard to get money in buckets number 2. But it's also hard to get money in bucket number 3 because need blind institutions are, well, Harvard, Yale, Princeton, those types of institutions. Okay, the 4th bucket would be what I would call a hybrid scholarship. And these scholarships are usually at schools that they stack scholarships. So, and there's usually a person at that school who is a phenomenal access warrior and they're stacking scholarships for you. So they basically have a merit scholarship, then they pull some need money for you. And they're kind of like, it's like hats on top of hats. They're like pulling all these pieces together and they make a pot. And basically they say, okay, here, you can have this whole pot. Okay, so then what does that look like on the financial aid documentation? It looks like 15 different scholarships that are all pieced together so that basically you have a full package. So let's take a case of a kid who's a Ghanaian. This is a student from Ghana, which is in West Africa. And I'm going to give you his profile. All right. He's an engineering student, and then he is selected for the National Math and Science Competition. That's the NMSQ. And he is Ghana's next Einstein. So he is, what am I realizing from this? I'm realizing that he is not just competitive at his school, he is competitive nationally. All right, he is 7 A1s on the West African Secondary School leaving examination, which is the top 5% of the nation. He's taking the SAT, which is a 1560. And then he's an 800, 800, 800 on his physics, math, and chemistry. So his scores are really pretty phenomenal, particularly from this context. This school, this competition, I want you guys to understand how crazy this competition is. I mean, this is a screenshot from BBC, and as you can see, it says what it's like to compete in Ghana's National Science and Math Quiz. It is a famous national competition, and as you can see, people over here are going crazy over it. It's almost like a football match. It's televised. There are only 9 students in the nation that are picked for this competition, and it is quite an honor to be in this competition. So this kid is in that 9, and he is the only one of that 9 who's in Form 3. He's a year younger than everybody else. Everybody else is a senior. Okay, I want to stop this. That's a competition, all right? That's a national math and science competition. This is the kid, I did ask him for permission to share his story with you, and this is the kid who is on our right in the light blue shirt. As I said, there's 9 kids, and he's the only kid, he's the youngest kid of the group, all right? And he becomes almost like this national phenomenon because people start to fall in love with him as he's on TV, and he just, I mean, as you can see here, he's being quoted. He's just got such an incredible personality as well. All right, now, Michael applies to 2 buckets, okay? There's 4 buckets that he can apply to, and he applies to 2 buckets. He applies to the need blind bucket. He applies to the need aware and meets full need bucket. And I want you to ask yourself, if you're Michael's friend, where do you think he can get in? So everybody, I want you to drop in the chat what you think happened here. So he applies to all these schools. What do you think happens to Michael? Okay, Rabsel. I'm sorry, I'm saying your name wrong. I'm sure I'm saying your name wrong. Okay, you guess MIT. Thanks for starting the conversation off. Okay, Lucky, he gets into the second bucket. Okay, interesting. Anybody else want to weigh in on this? Second bucket. Now, I'm curious to know if you guys think he gets into all of the schools in the second bucket, or like which school in the second bucket. I don't know what your level of, he probably got into a very good school. Thank you. Thank you for that, Namita. Anybody else want to weigh in? Stanford. Interesting. Tinley, Stanford. I think Stanford. Okay. So Michael does all of this. Okay. He goes through this whole thing. We estimated his chances. All right. And this is actually what happens to Michael. All right. He gets, here are his need blind schools in orange. Here are his need aware schools in blue. And he actually, unfortunately, doesn't get into anything. All right. He gets waitlisted though at University of Chicago and Caltech. He does regular decision. He doesn't do a single early decision. Okay. And I'm sharing this example with you because this is the level of competition when it comes to the United States. I want it to be very clear how crazy selective this process is, because you can be a kid like Michael and actually not end up with a viable option. So what does Michael do? He has to kind of wait to see if he will get off the wait list at University of Chicago or Caltech. We saw what happened with him because on March 30th of that year, his counselor wrote in on a Facebook page and says, I don't know what happened. Okay, he has a 1560, he's a good writer, he has $2,000 to spend, and he wants to pursue mechanical engineering. I want you to understand that if Michael had been a full pay student, okay, he can absolutely pay everything. I can guarantee you he could have gotten into several of these schools. But because he's up against harder numbers, okay, he's up against he's basically looking at a 1% admit rate at all of these need-aware schools. Like, that's hard. That's really hard. And he's up against kids like himself. He's not up against an average kid in Ghana. He's up against himself or a version of himself from Togo, from Burundi, from South Africa, from Europe, you know? So this happens to him, and his counselor is really baffled. He's like, oh my God, because not only was he a next Einstein, but he also did, by the way, Ghana United Nations. He was Junior Achievers Club. He's done the Rhesus Foundation. What went wrong? How can he get off the wait list? And he's asking what to do. Okay, what went wrong? What could Michael have done? Okay, kids, this is about the list. when you construct the most important thing you can do when you are looking for money is the construction of the list. So if Michael had to do it all over again, I would say to Michael and his school, all 4 buckets, not just 2 buckets, all 4 buckets. And I would also have said, not just the United States. You need to look beyond the United States. You need to look in Canada. You need to look in Singapore, because with those scores, you could have gotten something in Singapore. You could have gotten something in South Korea. Okay, so what actually happens to Michael is somebody tagged us on that Facebook post, and there's a group of us who run something called Second Chance. And we basically help a student who is rejected from the United States go elsewhere in the world before the fall. And so Michael ended up actually in Hong Kong on a full scholarship. And he was actually, the school that he ended up at, he is one of the first Ghanaian students. They took 2 Ghanaian students. This was 2 years ago. And he was one of them. And so he is on Hong Kong at a full scholarship. And we know that he's at a very good school. So whoever wrote down that he ended up at a good school, he did end up at a good school, but he didn't end up at a good school in the United States. So what I am here to tell you is when you do your list, particularly this year, when it's a COVID year, last year, it was very, very hard. It was harder for most people in the world to get full financial aid. You want to diversify the list, okay? And you want to go through all 4 buckets. You don't want to narrow. So in other words, Michael should have applied to, for example, a public school, like an honors program, University of Southern Mississippi, engineering, like they have a scholarship for people over 1450. There's another school like in the Midwest, like public schools generally have a 1450 cutoff. He could have, with his SAT scores, gotten into an honors school at a public university, like diversify. He basically only went for private research institutions and also just 2 buckets. So I would have said to Michael, diversify your list and also make it a global list, okay? Because then you really have options, because he only has $2,000 to spend. And what Michael's not also figuring into that $2,000 is he's got to have money for the flight. Like he's got to actually have $7,000, not just $2,000. So here is what I would recommend that you do, is to look at, where can you get information about like how to construct a list? There is a really great resource out there called the Jenny Kent Financial Aid List for International Students. You can sort the list. You can actually see schools that give financial aid to students. You can then go on their websites. You can see if they're need aware or if they're a public school or and you can kind of look at the data. You got to really look at the data very carefully. And then I would also say, does everybody see the line that says look at beyond the United States and India? In India right now, there is a movement for these liberal arts colleges that are very similar to schools like Williams, Swarthmore, and these schools are schools like Ashoka, Kriya, Flame. They're these liberal arts colleges, and they really only cost $13,000 USD, $13,000. And they give scholarships, and they particularly give scholarships to the ASEAN region, and you are in the ASEAN region. So I would say you can look at India. You can also look at Hong Kong. Hong Kong also has special scholarships for this region, and there are 9 public institutions in Hong Kong, and Hong Kong costs $25,000. So let's say that you got a full tuition scholarship in Hong Kong, like you would only have to pay $10,000 to get a world-class education. Hong Kong is also really safe. Hong Kong also allows you to stay 1 year afterwards to work in a market. To work in a market like Hong Kong is to get incredible experience because it is considered to be an incredibly strong financial market. You could also look at Singapore. Singapore has some scholarships. However, with Singapore, you have to be very careful because Singapore requires extraordinarily high testing, okay? Except there is one school called it's called SUSS, Singapore University of Social Sciences. And they have a very special scholarship called the Temasek Scholarship. And I will just drop this scholarship in the chat. And it covers everything. It covers tuition, room and board. There's a living stipend. There is even a flight involved. It's an incredibly robust scholarship, and they started it for the first time last year for social sciences students. So if you're interested in the social sciences and you're interested in Singapore, this is a very good scholarship to look at. The other thing that is really nice about this scholarship is that it is for all 4 years, and Singapore is an incredibly safe place to be. And it's also specifically for the ASEAN countries. And ASEAN is this region that we're in, right? Like Nepal, Indonesia, Malaysia, Bhutan, Bangladesh. So that's a really great scholarship to look at. In Japan, there are also scholarships, and there are English medium institutions in Japan. But the thing about Japan that you have to know is that you should be interested in Japanese, because unlike Singapore, or unlike Hong Kong, or unlike India, Japan is not as universally English speaking. Like we have been told that kids really kind of should learn a little bit of Japanese at least. Okay, the same thing would go for South Korea. There are some English medium programs in South Korea now that are popping up that give significant scholarships to students. And these are all really strong markets. You know, so for example, you wanted to study economics or you wanted to study business, these are really good. South Korea, Japan is like 25,000 USD. South Korea also, same thing in that same kind of range. So I just want to kind of throw that out there at you guys. Now let me see if I can go back. I don't know how to go back. Let me stop this for a second and go back to, I'm sorry guys, technical difficulties, 1 second.
You're fine.
Okay. Let's do the screen share again. I'm going to go over a couple of ways in which you can all save some money. All right. So oops.
Is it present?
It's present. You're right. It's present. Okay. Does everybody see the test at the top, Duolingo English test? This is Duolingo. Instead of taking the TOEFL, everybody, you can take the Duolingo English test, and you can actually ask for waivers. And in fact, your organization is probably eligible for waivers. And Melissa, I can hook you up with them if you need to. Okay, because I'm sure that Sam Fleischman at Duolingo would be happy to consider your organization for waivers. And you can take this test basically at your house for 30 minutes, and you can get an English proficiency score. Okay, that will save you $250. The other thing that I would say when you are looking for financial aid is to write out on the additional information section of the common application. This is for the United States. Give us kind of like your history, like your narrative. So usually students who are, how do I say this? For example, Michael, okay, the last kid that we looked at, case B, the Ghanaian student. He had a journey that basically went from rural Ghana to the capital of Ghana because he got a scholarship. Then he got another scholarship to a high school. Then from that high school, he started to look at schools in the United States. So you could actually see that his mobility, let's call it, his social mobility, started to climb because he was such a good student through a series of scholarships that got him to a very strong public high school in the capital city of Ghana. So sometimes with students who are particularly strong for financial aid, you can actually see almost like a journey over a lifetime of like when a student started to pick up English, when a student started to get access to a particular school, or maybe they got into a specialized school. So what I have found is very helpful in terms of advocating for yourself is if you can kind of give us a statement of like your mobility, like where are you born? Like give us some context, like what's the significance of this region? Like knowing that Michael basically went from a rural region to the capital helped us make a case for Michael, because basically we were able to say, look at what this student has achieved. Look at his SAT scores. Look at the fact that he's first generation, that his parents didn't go to college. Look at his educational journey. And against all of that, he's Ghana's next Einstein. Like, this is an incredible student. You would be a fool not to have him on your campus. Okay, so I would recommend putting this educational statement. I mean, here at my school, we actually require everybody who is looking for full financial aid to do something like this, either on the additional information section or somewhere within the common application. We want there to be a narrative about your journey so that you can expand the point of view beyond the 4 years, because oftentimes it is a path of mobility that we see students tracking that actually happens earlier than high school. So also you should tell us about, for example, if you're part of a group, okay, so like, for example, we were just working with a South Sudanese refugee a couple months ago in the spring. And one of the things that we had him discuss on his application was what tribe he was from, okay? So he was from a minority tribe. Now, that minority tribe got then kicked out of South Sudan and then began his journey as a refugee. Well, he has to actually say that because people who are sitting and reading your application don't know that there are several tribes in South Sudan and which ones are the minorities and which ones are the majorities, like all those kinds of things. So if there's a particular context to your cultural identity, let's say, put it in this educational statement. And, you know, as I said, you want to detail your educational journey from primary to high school. Did you earn any scholarships along the way? And then also start to talk about when English enters your life, and if there are any educational turning points. So for example, the student who is going to Woodstock, if there is a point in your life where basically you applied to Woodstock, you got a scholarship to Woodstock, you need to explain how you got access to that. Okay, that will be helpful in people understanding your whole sort of financial narrative. Okay, I really feel like I rushed through that, but I hope that we've done what I said we were going to do, which was basically at the very beginning, talk a little bit about the United States, talk a little bit about what happens if you want money, what happens if you need money, and some other countries. Now, I realize this is a very cursory, simplified overview of some very complex stuff, but I really feel like this hopefully gives you a sense of at least how competitive it is, and also that you should diversify, not just within a country, but across countries. Okay, so at this point, I'm going to ask Melissa if there's anything that she heard that I missed, because she's a pro counselor and can listen from that point of view.
Well, first of all, I mean, thank you for covering. Let me switch my view really quickly, just because I don't want to have myself. So thank you for covering that much information as quickly as you could. I will say initially too, I mean, we will be hosting throughout the year, like a Canadian university counselor. We have a counselor from Singapore who's gathering some university representatives from Japan, Singapore, Hong Kong to do a more detailed presentation of these countries. We have a US based counselor that will talk a little bit more about their university and other universities in the US. So this was a perfect place, I think, to start. And we do have a couple of questions and just a couple of quick comments, things that came up during the call that Joan spoke about, that I will post more information about. One would be the Concourse platform. It's a wonderful platform that I will be able to approve students for their applications. I spoke with Concourse and just made sure that for the purpose of working together with students in Bhutan, I would be able to approve their applications. So I will post more information about that. Duolingo as well. I will get in touch with our contact there and post more information about that. And then one more thing, there was a question that's probably a little bit too long to cover today, and that's what is best to apply: early action, regular decision, or early decision? So it's kind of, Joan, if you want to do a quick snippet on kind of how hard it is to apply, or I can for early decision, because you're really locking yourself into whatever that price tag will be.
Okay.
So that's one thing, yeah.
Melissa, thank you for that. And actually, I have a podcast on this if anybody's interested.
Yeah, if you share that with me,
Yeah.
I'll put this in the resources when we upload your recording, but we would love to have that.
But in general, everybody, I want you to think about this from a university's point of view. If I'm in United States University and I'm at the highest price point and I'm spending more than $250,000 on a kid, I want to know that that kid will come to my campus. it's just what is so, you know, I don't want to spend that amount of money on a kid who I'm not sure is going to come to my campus. So I always tell kids, do an early decision 1, do an early decision 2, do a regular round. Use all 3 rounds to maximize your chances for financial affordability.
And I'll post some more information for people who aren't aware of the difference between these 3 and pros and cons. I'll post an article and then we can have a chat and a discussion further on that. One question I think is really quick to answer, and you sort of answered it, but do you have to apply separately for merit aid in the US?
Well, it depends, because some schools are automatic. So when you remember that slide where it was like University of Florida and like some of that was automatic scholarships, but most of it was you had to apply with a separate application, like or not a separate application, but an additional application, let's say. So I would say there's no universal rule for that. You just have to, everybody, as you can see, this is a very complicated process. You actually have to read the instructions. Like, so every school will say, well, we do merit scholarships and it's automatic. And then you're like, okay, then I don't need to do anything. And then other schools will say, we have merit scholarships, but you have to use this link and you apply through this portal. And then you got to do that. Or other schools still would be like, well, we have an interview process in addition to an additional application. And then you go and do that. Morehead Kane literally has you fly into their campus and they interview you on their campus. And so I would just say that it depends on the school.
Yeah, a good rule of thumb for everything related to any admissions opportunity in the world is to look at the fine print and look at what they're requiring you to do. So that's absolutely great advice. One thing that's come up a few times is, do international students fill out the CSS profile? So maybe just a snippet on CSS profile.
Okay, so this falls under really the question that you're asking, which is such an important question, is like, what's the financial documentation I have to fill out? So if you're applying for a school where there is some sort of need that is being calculated, you have to prove your need. You can't just say I need it. You can't just check a box that says I need financial aid. You have to prove that you have the documentation that backs up the fact that you are claiming that you need financial aid. So that can be the CSS profile, or sometimes they look at bank statements. Sometimes they also look at, well, it used to be the IFSAA. I mean, I think that that's being discontinued, but yes, you will have to figure out, you have to fill out some sort of documentation like the CSS profile. Different universities want different things. Some want the CSS profile, some don't. Some want you to fill out their own online application. So again, this is one of those decentralized things about the United States where you've got to make a list of, literally a spreadsheet of schools, their requirements, their deadlines, and what they need for you to be in the financial aid category.
Perfect, thank you. And last, but certainly, well, at least for right now, we can, I'm still monitoring the questions, but it's such an interesting question, but does apply, when you say, when you're applying, that I will be applying for financial aid, does that hurt my chances of getting in?
Yeah,
Yes. Question.
Yes, absolutely, categorically, yes, unless you are applying to a need-blind institution. But a need-blind institution is an institution like Harvard and MIT. Like, these are really, really hard institutions to get into. And they're not even institutions to get into in a way, because I would say that they're really highly rejective schools. A 1% admit rate is a 99% rejection rate, folks. So yes, I mean, if there's anything that you take away from Michael's case, like the Ghanaian student's case, it is that the reason why he was rejected and waitlisted is because he needed aid. So what does this mean? It means that you put down on your financial aid documentation as much as you possibly can afford, okay? Because there are some schools that literally will be like, okay, these kids can afford. There was a school that literally said to me, we put kids in buckets. Here are the kids who can afford 40, here are the kids who can afford 30, here are the kids who can afford 20, here are the kids who can afford 10. So if you can afford 20, don't you dare put on the application that you can only afford 2. You're hurting yourself.
Yeah.
Put as much as you possibly can afford, okay? Reasonably, okay? When we say afford, we don't mean like that means you got to go out and like sell everything. It means what can you afford right now? Put that number down, because the higher the number, the higher your chances. The lower your number, the harder it is to get in. So, you know, even if Michael had $25,000, he probably could have gotten into at least half of those schools. Yeah. So yes, the reason why he didn't get in wasn't that everybody, you can all see how like crazy competitive he is. He's like nuts. He's a nuts student. He's a once in a lifetime student. But when you are applying for that much aid and you're applying for somebody to invest $250,000 in you, then you are against all the other lifetime students that other people have in their respective countries. So yes, it hurts your chances. And it doesn't hurt your chances at Harvard, Princeton, MIT, Amherst, Yale, but I wouldn't also recommend that you put all your eggs in those baskets. Like, I think that that would be a dangerous, treacherous list. And Michael has even said publicly now that he wishes his list was different in the United States.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry to be so adamant about this, but I really want everybody to hear this because there's a lot at stake for you when it comes to money.
So thank you, Joan. I'm putting one resource. I don't think it's comprehensive, but the Kent and Levy resource that I just linked in, and we'll link this in the presentation resources, but I don't think the question is there a resource that lists the different schools based on the different types of schools? So need blind, need aware, that sort of thing. I don't think there's a comprehensive list that I'm aware of. It just doesn't exist. I did post the Kent and Levy. This resource, I'll explain it more in our platform, but the Kent and Levy resource does, what we're looking at when we look at that as counselors is the percentage of international students receiving aid and the percentage of aid that they will offer you. So if it's 100%, like Joan was saying in some of the examples, they will meet your full need. So if it says 100% percentage of international students receiving aid, the average financial aid award, the amount of need that they will meet, we want it to be as high as possible. That doesn't mean that you'll get it, but it does mean that institution is looking to fund a certain number of students up to full need. It's tricky.
And I think the other thing that I hope you all are taking away from this is it's actually less important the name of the school when you're in this position, and more important the access to the university, guys. Like, in other words, if you applied to 10 schools or 15 schools and you got one, that's a miracle given the odds.
Yeah.
And I think that what should be important to you and what should be the compass to you is not the name of the school. It really should be your access to higher education in another country so that you have more social mobility and global mobility, if that's what you want. And so part of also Michael's regret is the fact that he basically was really focused on names, you know, and I really tell counselors, if we all go after the same names, it is just that much harder to get into those schools. Yeah. So you know, believe me, it's easier to let your compass be affordability and access. Don't let your compass be the name of the school, because quite frankly, all of these schools in the United States are really good.
Yeah. Yeah. Or around the world. I mean, like you said, there are plenty of opportunities. You know, for example, I have students here who look at schools in the Netherlands because they can finish their degrees in 3 years, and regardless of their status as an international student, I mean, it's still a relatively low cost of attendance to school in the Netherlands. Canada is relatively lower compared to the US, and scholarships are becoming a little bit more readily available. So the US, we use the US as an example because it's probably the most problematic. And so it's the most complex to understand. Joan and I have both sent students to universities in the US where the full tuition was covered because they were talented students and they were coming from a very attractive part of the world where the university was trying to gain more students from. So at certain schools, you will be a very desirable applicant and very deserving and will be rewarded financial aid money. And so there was a question that said, what is a good college list? And I would echo what Joan said, is that we want you to have options that in the end, as good counselors for our students, we want our students to have options that make the most sense. So we would never advise a student to only apply to the most highly selective, what we call highly rejective schools where they might not get money. That's not advisable. So we look for students to have a range of options around the world in different countries with different price tags that we can say, well, in the end, you'll be able to choose. You'll have the final decision that will make the most sense for your family. So I know that's not necessarily what is a good college list? As a counselor, we would say places where you can get in and where you can afford to go, where you'll be happy, where they have your courses that you want to study, where they will prepare you for life after university. and just really be supportive of students like you on campus. That's probably a terrible answer, but it's the truth.
No, it's the truth. It's the
Yeah.
truth. Yeah.
Last but not least, I think it's a little bit hard to answer, but we're going to wrap up the questions now. Please be sure to look in the chat for the platform that we use for all of our resources and resource sharing. But one of the last questions is, what is an average acceptance rate in percentage? I don't know if that's US, but I think, I don't know, it's something like what, Joan, 65+% of US universities accept 50% or more of their students who are applying.
Yeah, but I think what we're asking you to do in this webinar is to not look at the average acceptance rate, because the average acceptance rate is an average, and you are in the bucket of being on the extreme end of competitiveness.
Yeah.
So regularly, and this actually bothers me as a college counselor, like it really bothers me that basically people say, well, our percentages, our average acceptance rate is 23%. But then I know as a counselor, and Melissa knows as a counselor, that actually they only took like 3 kids from the continent last year. Continent meaning Africa, when there've been 600 applications. Right. So, but Melissa, what I'll do is some of this information, because sometimes it's a little bit helpful to be repetitive.
Yeah.
I have a financial aid presentation where Michael actually speaks, because maybe you guys would actually really like to hear his point of view on this. Yeah. So I'll send that to you, and then I'll send you the podcast where I talk a little bit about early decision and some strategies, just so it's like, if you want it to be, if you want like, if you want to listen to it in more in depth, in a less kind of rushed fashion, like you can if you want.
Yeah, perfect. I think this presentation today, your podcast, the presentation with Michael, any of the resources that we've talked about, like Duolingo, these are on long-term, ongoing, and especially Concourse, the application platform that Joan was talking about. These are resources that we want to provide to families and students, long-term, ongoing, and I will be on that platform if you have individual questions. And so when somebody says, what is a good college list? If you get in touch with someone like me, or if I need Joan's help, you can always get in touch with me and we can talk about what that means. So it's really hard to say what that is for any one person, but in the interest of time, thank you so much to everyone who joined. How do you apply for Concourse? Hopefully, Tenzin, if you don't belong to our, what we call Mighty Networks platform, please subscribe there and please follow us. It's not meant to like spam your inbox. It's really just meant, it's like nothing can replace, like we can't use Facebook and a website for stuff like this. So this is what we use to post all of our resources. So I will be posting an article today or tomorrow on Concourse. And what you do is I have a code that is attached to my name, and I can approve your application, and then you will become part of the Concourse platform, and I can help you with that as well. So yeah, how do we arrange an appointment? Let me just type my email really quickly in here so that if anybody has questions after the fact, you can be in touch. I've posted my email, melissat22@gmail.com. And then also, Tim Lee, thank you for reposting our platform. Okay, we have like 30 seconds left.
No, Melissa, one thing, can we just do one thing before we like close this? I really appreciate your respect for all the time. I also just want to say, Melissa, thank you so much for bringing us all together, and Tinley and your team, Kitso, thank you so much for this time together. I really appreciate it. Kids, can you just write down like one takeaway that you've learned from tonight that you didn't know before we say goodbye to you? Because we just want to check your learning. We want to see if you learned anything new, like maybe like one thing that you learned tonight that you didn't know before. Can you just please, 1 second to just drop it in the chat.
Yeah,
so that I just want to know for myself too, if we hit the target, if we helped you.
Well, we have so far like kind of the buckets, like the different categories of schools. That's really insightful, I think. Procedures, yep. So maybe how to go about certain things. Ooh, that's a good one.
That's a good one, Rebsel. That's a good one.
Sadly, it's so sad.
Sadly, but you took away the right message. That's correct. You're right about that.
Yeah.
Yes, and Lockie, that's also correct. I think sometimes people think that I mean, it is going to be special that you're from Bhutan because, my God, there's not that many of you in the US higher education space, but that alone is not enough. You know, academics alone is not enough. So,
That's great.
okay. Melissa, thank you. And kids, thank you for your attention and your presence
Parents.
on this call. It's been really nice to
And
be
if
part
you-
of your journey for tonight.
Yeah, and last but not least, if you have we'll be sharing all of this, and please pass to your friends, people at your schools, especially educators. Maybe there are some people in your communities that you know are connected to other people like you. This is not a competition, so we don't need to keep people out of the information. There's enough for everybody to go around. We don't want that message to get out there, but sharing our resources and our platforms would be really helpful. We actually have a full schedule of monthly meetings that we will be releasing in the next week from here until May. So like we said before, university systems around the world will be covered. Essays, there's another session on soft skills for college success. There will be career development resources. We have had people from around the world reach out to us to share resources with you and people like you and your parents and your friends. So there are a lot of people, just surprisingly and amazingly, like Joan, around the world who are just really interested in reaching students like you. So thank you so much. Take care, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
We'll be in touch.
Thank you, Joan. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye.
Thank you.